Good morning and welcome to Pictorial Planet. One of my patrons recently sent me a formula for an additive for Rodinal. The idea is that it might reduce the grain of Rodinal. Now, some of us love the grain of Rodinal. It's a particularly nice in medium format films, but there's always that time that you might need to use your Rodinal with 35mm or maybe a faster film with larger grain, and you want to reduce that grain a little bit. So I've come out here to Brodie Castle to take a stream of photographs of the castle, and then I'm going to test this little magic formula additive to see if it helps actually reduce that grain of Rodinal. It's a useful thing to have on your darkroom shelf if it works. If it works, I'll give you the formula. If it doesn't, we're going to move on and find something else that might work. So let's crack on. I'll get these photographs taken. And here's our Rodinal, and here is our grain reducer. Now, just a bit more background about this. This patron who sent me this information found this in a cupboard and thought, I'm going to try it just for fun anyway. It was kind of related to something I talk about in my book, and so he tried it out and it worked. He showed me examples and it looks like it works. So hey, you know what? If somebody gives you a clue like that something good might happen, you should go and try it yourself. I get a lot of people asking me, hey John, could you try this for me? Could you try that for me? Well, come on guys, go out and try it yourself. This is how you discover new things about photography, about working in the darkroom. Try it out yourself. So I'm going to try out this Rodinal grain reducer. So this is what I've done. This is how I've developed the films today. I used FP4 and I rated it at ISO 100. Now, I rated it at 100 because in regular Rodinal, that's what the rating is for me. So I'm assuming it's going to be similar with the grain reducer, but I haven't tested it. So let's see what happens with 100. I developed at 1+50 for 8 minutes using Ilford agitation. Now that is the recommended, the 1+50 was the recommended dilution by the patron who sent me this information. So I'm going to use the same dilution as him. My 8 minutes is because that is the length of time that I like to develop at 1+50 FP4 rated at 100. So that's the basis of the experiment today. I'm going to cut the film. I'm going to develop half of it in regular straight 1+50 Rodinal, and I'm going to develop the other part in 1+50 Rodinal with 10 milliliters of this grain reducer added to 500 milliliters of diluted developer. 10 mil to 500 milliliters. That's what I'm going to do. Let's see how the negatives looked after development. Here are the negatives. The top ones are the straight Rodinal 1+50, 8 minutes. The bottom one is the Rodinal 1+50, 8 minutes with the addition of the grain reducer. And straight away you can tell that the bottom negatives with the grain reducer have lower contrast. They look less developed than these ones. So it definitely has affected the development of the film. The next thing I need to do is scan these in so that I can see if there's been a change in the grain and the grain structure. Now, I'm not going to say if there's been an improvement in the grain because I like Rodinal grain. Rodinal grain's a good thing. But sometimes, like we said in the introduction, we might not want that grain. If we're maybe using a HP5 with 35mm, we might want to reduce the grain of our Rodinal. So it's going to be interesting. We're going to scan these in, have a look at the grain, and then I'm going to print. And I'm going to print a regular 10x8 that I usually do to show you. But I'm also going to print a part of a 12x16 to see what it would be like if I blew up one of these negatives right up to 12x16 inches, and that will see if it's possible to use FP4 with Rodinal at such a large size. Some people would never do that because it's too grainy, but I've shown you in the past it's actually quite possible, and this grain reducer might actually even help us. So we'll have a look at that too. Let's crack on, let's get over to the scans and have a look to see what they're like. I've scanned in the negatives. On the left hand side we can see the regular Rodinal, and on the right hand side the Rodinal with grain reducer. Now I've tweaked the contrast slightly to balance the two pictures. So as we would if we scan something in, we would tweak the contrast, and I've done that with these so that we can see a more similar picture of how we would really use this image. Of course there's a lot more I could do, but I haven't done any more than that. That's all I've done, is just balance the contrast. So I'm going to zoom in here and we'll have a look at the two negatives. So on the left, the regular Rodinal is grainy. Of course it is, it's always grainy, and it's detailed, sharp and grainy, there's no doubt. Rodinal has a nice look to it. It always has a nice look to me. It seems to glow. The light bounces off things in a Rodinal negative. Look at that, the way it's bouncing off those windows. If we compare that to the right hand side, it doesn't look as bouncy, as contrasty, as sunny on the right as it does on the left. And this is all to do with the shape of the curve of a developed negative in Rodinal. Some films won't give you this, but many will, and I always have Rodinal on the shelf because of that. I like this developer. So it's got a lovely glow to it there. So what about the grain? Well, immediately on the right hand side there's less grain. I can see it straight away. It's not as grainy as this, not at all. Let's move up to an area of the sky. Oh well, I think you can see straight away there the difference is huge. Actually, I'm impressed. This is the Rodinal grain, and this is it looks more like a D76 grain. It's very reasonable. It's really reduced the grain, at least in the scan. That's impressive. There is a difference in the contrast of the negative. It's a softer kind of look to it. It looks sharp though. It does look nice. If you look at this tower on the left, you can see there's a lot of contrast there. You see that there's a darker side, on the shadow side. It's quite a lot different from the right hand side. It's very contrasty. Even the tiles are showing a lot of contrast. On the right hand side, it's softer. It's less sunny is a good way of putting it, I suppose. But it's quite nice. It's not it's quite pictorial, actually. Someone asked me the other day in a question, what did I mean by pictorial tonality? And I said it is full tonality, from rich blacks right up to whites and everything in between. No compression, lovely wide tones, so there's a lot of space in the tones, and things move more gradually through your image in the tonality. There's less hard contrast, and this is more pictorial than this. You can see this is harder. It's a harder image, and this is a more picturesque image, more of a painterly almost image. It's very nice. The details there, you can see all the pebble dash in the wall here. This is more pronounced, but then of course there's more grain, and grain pronounces these things more. It also sharpens things grain, so higher grain films tend to be sharper, and so this is a bit softer in the sharpness because of the smaller grain. But you know, it's quite nice. Let's move along here. If you looked at this one on the right, having just come out of the developing tank, you'd be very pleased with that. That's a very nice picture. If you hadn't seen the Rodinal one on the left, which is punchy, isn't it? It's quite punchy and hard contrast. But this one It's quite pictorial. I would imagine some of you would prefer this. I know it looks more like an FX55, more like a D76y sort of image, doesn't it? Yeah, how interesting that the grain reducer does this. All right, enough of looking at the negative all blown up like this on the computer. I'm not one for sitting in front of a computer all day. I'd much rather be out taking photographs. So let's go over to the print and have a look to see what that looks like. First of all, we're looking at the Rodinal straight, and it's a lovely image. I really like that print. It's got that Rodinal glow, which I like a lot. Note the sky. It's picked up the clouds in the sky very well. It's a nice developer, and what I like is that at 8 minutes you're not burning out the highlights. So I think that the Rodinal times given in some places are way too high, and so I encourage you to experiment with Rodinal and bring the timing down. And this would remind you is 8 minutes at 1+50. And this here is the Rodinal with the reducer, the grain reducer, and it looks lovely too, doesn't it? Not much wrong with that. Now, it's one grade higher, so this is grade 3, and the straight Rodinal was grade 2. But when we look at them together, compare those like this, we can see they're very similar with that grade difference. I think there's more tonality actually in the Rodinal with the grain reducer. I think you'll see that there's longer tones in it. It's not quite as contrasty. Look for instance at the tower at the top there, and you'll see what I mean, that there's more tonality in the left in the grain reducer than there is in the other one. Now I'm looking at the grain, and I think the Rodinal has a little more grain, but we're going to see in a moment the difference. I'm just going to let you have a good look at this print with the grain reducer. Have a good look at that. That's a nice print. FP4 EI100, 8 minutes. I think it could probably do with 9 minutes. I would probably extend it to 9 minutes, because that would bring that grade down from 3 to 2.5 more towards 2. Now let's look at the blow up. So I did these enlargements as though I was going to print at 12 by 16. Now from a 35mm negative, that's a huge enlargement. And here is the straight Rodinal. So let's have a look at the grain of a 12 by 16 print. And then I'm going to bring in the one behind it, and this is the grain with the reducer. And I think there's quite a lot less grain, which is very interesting. Look at that. The grain on the right compared to the grain on the left. The grain seems softer on the left, on the grain reduced one. It seems a sharper grain on the right, more distinct, and it's softer on the left. A little bit like a sulfite developer, just a little bit. It's obviously not a sulfite developer, but it looks a little bit that way. But there's quite a difference. If we look at the flag area and look at that grain there, and then I'll bring the other one in, and there's the grain there. They're both lovely pictures. I kind of like the painterly look of the Rodinal. Now I know I mentioned earlier that long gradation, long tonality is a painterly or pictorial look, but there's something also about this kind of charcoaly painting effect that Rodinal has, which is very attractive. I really quite like it. It is one of my favorite developers. Look at that, it's beautiful. And that's the grain reduced one, and I think that's more tonal, less hard. Very nice. I'm impressed. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you think about these two pictures? Do you think that that grain has been reduced, or do you think it just looks different? Do you think that the tonality is different, and which do you prefer? Do you prefer the grain reduced version, or do you prefer the Rodinal version? Straight Rodinal. Let me know in the comments below. I'd be really interested for your feedback on these two pictures. And thanks very much for watching. It was a bit of fun this week just to try this thing out. And I thank you for bearing with me and watching through this. I will put up the formula now of how you can make your own grain reducer. And you can try it yourself at home. And I encourage you, everything I do on my channel, try it yourself. Try it out, have a go, see how it is for you. You'll come up with ideas that I haven't thought of. And I love that. And I hope you share them with me, and we can share them with the world. So thanks very much for watching. Thank you for my patrons for supporting me to do this work. And thank you for all of you who buy my book. I really appreciate that. And I will see you for a tip on Friday. Bye for now.